Thanks for tuning in to High Green, the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society's official podcast. High Green is funded by your membership in the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society, and any opinions expressed throughout the show are solely those of the owner. We hope you enjoyed today's show, and as always, if you're interested in learning more about our organization, you can visit our website, www.B&MRRHS.org.
Perhaps this story hasn't been told in B&M circles, but it's a B&M story and it's a good one.
And the next thing you know, we hear 119 getting out of town with this steam engine working like the hell. He's going up by way of Rutland.
If you haven't gotten the chance to check out our online archive yet, you definitely owe it to yourself to take a look. Right on our website, you can find the online archive, a digitized collection of fascinating treasure trove of documents pertaining to the Boston and Maine, the Maine Central, and other New England railroads as well. Inside, you'll find hundreds of fascinating documents: executive documents, financial documents, operational documents, abandonment files. We also have the entire run of the Society newsletter, a Boston and Maine freight car index, employee magazines from the Boston and Maine and the Maine Central, and so much more. There's literally hundreds of hours of documents that you can get lost in. You can find all of that right on our website, B&MRRHS.org. And if you like what you see, consider making a donation to the Society or joining so you too can volunteer as part of the Archives Committee. We're here in Beverly, Massachusetts on March 7th, 2021, conducting an interview with Russell Munroe Jr. regarding his history in railroading, railroad photography, and his time on the Boston and Maine as well. So Russell, you can start out just kind of talking a little bit about how you became interested and involved in railroading in general when you were younger. When you were a kid, how did you become sort of interested in trains and railroading?
Always been interested in trains.
Yeah.
Ever since I've been old enough to walk. Excuse me, I go back to 34. Mm-hmm. And I remember the old American type engines when they used to come in Marblehead. I lived in Marblehead at the time. And I used to be taken down to the station there and watch the trains come in and all that. And my father used to take me around. He never took pictures, and I never didn't start taking pictures until 1948 myself. Mm-hmm. But I remember a lot about that area in Marblehead. And I did some train riding, with the parents and all that. But I've always wanted to work for the railroad. And I worked in a machine shop for about 10 years. And that got kind of dicey after a while. So I finally got a chance to work for the railroad. And I went into Boston Yard. And they still had a hump yard. I had a hump up there in Somerville. Uh-huh. And they had a call boy. I mean, you have to go in three times a day. I think it was 7, 3, and 11 at night. And you have to sit in this big room. There might be 25 or 30 people in there, workers. And then the one guy would get up and he'd say, you got 7 jobs tonight. And he'd list off the guys in seniority. And, of course, you turn around and... Well, of course, I was just a newbie then, so I didn't get anywhere. But I was lucky I could work weekends because none of those guys like to work weekends. So this was on freight. And so I worked the humper one night. And, you go up in the hump there when they used to have a lot of freight trains in and out of Boston in those days. Right. And I was up there on the hang. You go by and Conductor would tell me what car's doing. You had to lift the drawbar. Let the car get over the hump here. And then the skate man would jump on it, and he'd go down the end of the line, which would be a half a mile, and he'd tie a brake on it. And then he set 2 or 3 cars down, and I think you could have 4 or 5 cars down there, and they can just let them go because they'd bang down there. Yeah. But anyway. I worked Boston Yard. I wasn't too keen about it. And then they had to ride the tops of the cars, either the 40-foot freight cars. Mm-hmm. And many times I worked on the freight, so you'd have to climb up in the freight car and work on walk across the tops of the cars. You had to tie a handbrake on them if you were in a siding, of course, and all that. And but I worked a lot of places. Started Lawrence Yard. I worked in Lawrence Yard for, I don't know, a long time. And Lawrence Yard was terrible. We were always derailing up there. And
It's still pretty bad now.
yeah, it still is. I don't think they fixed it up. I think there was like 18 tracks there,
Yep.
including a scale track. But you go up there and we never tipped anything over there, but I got involved in several derailments. We knocked 6 tank cars off we used to go up the street up to the Lawrence Gas, and we brought 6 empty tank cars down the street one afternoon, late afternoon. And I was sitting in the cab of the switcher, and I said to the engineer, I said, stop. I says, we're on the ground. And the cars are all coming down the hill sideways. Yeah. So we called over the yard office, told him about it. He says, well, pin the engine, leave them there. And they'll send a crew out there to put the cars back on the track later on tomorrow. Mm-hmm. They blocked the street off. I got involved in a lot of derailments like that. And but anyway, so I worked, 3 years on freight. And then I got injured pretty bad. I wound up in the hospital for a while. And I got crushed between cars. Mm-hmm. And I fell off and cracked ribs and dislocated my foot and everything. So I was out of work for 3 months. So anyway, then I decided to go back to passenger. I wanted to go back on passenger. Those days, the crews could go work passenger or freight. Mm-hmm. So I worked passenger jobs for a while. And in those days, they had the Bud cars. And they were nice. I liked them. And they were very easy to run, work. Yes, I've run them. And but anyway, so they told me to work out to South Acton. We only went as far as South Acton. So the engineer was an awfully nice guy, and we had a conductor and myself and an engineer. So we left South Acton one night, and he says, hey, come up front. All right, so I walked up front. I'd already taken my fares. So he says, you ever run one of these things? And I says, no. He says, you're going to run one tonight, he says. So anyway, he showed me what to do, and they're easy to run. They're easier than driving a car. Right. And so I ran it all the way to Boston.
Making all the stops.
Oh, yeah, and making all the stops, lifting the door. We put the passengers on the front end. Mm-hmm. Then the conductor was picking up the fares. And then I shut the door, look out, nobody running. Okay, off we go to the next stop. And I was doing that, did that for quite a while. This is taboo, for the crews to run the trains. You have to be a qualified engineer, right, which I wasn't. But anyway, we used to do a lot of stuff like that. Yeah. And but I worked passenger for 27 years, mm-hmm, and I was all over the place. And once in a while they'd call you for a freight job. And even though after I got injured, I worked a couple of freight jobs. They called me one night. The crew dispatcher called me one night. I think this was the last freight job I worked. He says, I just gotten into bed. And he says, how long will it take you to get to Portland? And I says, give it a little over 2 hours. He says, get up to Portland as quick as you can. He says, we're waiting for you. I says, all right. So I told my wife, I says, well, I'm out again. This is around 11 o'clock at night. So I got dressed, got in my car, and roared up to Portland. I get out of my car, parked, walked over, yard office, and he says, they're out there waiting for you. All right. There's this freight train out there waiting for me. So I walked over, 4 Bluebirds, and the 1700s, and about 100 cars. And I said, where's the conductor? He says, right here. And I says, here I am. Get on. He says, we're on our way. They'd been sitting there for 2 hours waiting for me. So off we went. All I did was just sit in the engine all the way to Gardner. Yeah. And so anyway, at Gardner, I had to get off. And then I had to hop a freight going back to Portland to get my car. But it was some of the jobs were really nice. I mean, I like some of the jobs. And another job I used to love was the North Conway local freight. Yep. You go to Dover, and we'd have a switch engine usually, and maybe 10, 20 cars, and we switch all the way up there. And then we get up to North Conway. We'd have just a buggy. We had a buggy in those days, and maybe one car, maybe just a buggy. And then we'd go down the street to a place which turns into a ski club in the wintertime. Yep. And then we'd stay there for the night, and then the next morning go back, have breakfast, get the switch engine, get it fired up, take a ride up to Jackson, nothing up there. We go all the way back to Portland. We used to do Davis and Rubber too.
Yeah, in Farmington.
In Farmington, we do that. And we'd go back, we'd have sometimes 20 cars going back to Dover, and that was a wonderful job. I put more bids in on that job, but I didn't have the seniority to keep it.
It was a pretty high seniority job.
Oh, it sure was.
You went on a Wolfboro?
Oh, yeah. I never went to Wolfboro, not on the B&M, but I went down there on the Wolfboro Railroad because I worked on the Wolfboro Railroad. I'll tell you one thing, they had a fan trip up there one day, and I used to go up Wolfboro every weekend, and they used to let me run the trains up there too. I never ran the steam engine, but I ran everything else, and so they come up with the Bud cars one day, 4 Bud cars out of Boston on a fan trip. And I'm up there working for the Wolfboro Railroad that day. And of course I'm running in, we pulled it into Wolfboro, and the guys in the Bud car, we had the steam engine. We put the steam engine on the head of the Bud cars, the 250, whatever the number of it was, and pulled the Bud cars down to Wolfboro. And so one of the guys, some of the guys on the railroad, the crews there said, "You working up here? I thought you worked for the B&M. I says, "I do." I says, "I just work up here on weekends." Oh, it was funny, Yeah. But they pulled the 4 Bud cars down with a steam engine. Yeah. And I never got to run that. I used to ride in it all the time, but I never ran it. But I used to run the Plymouth, and they had up there, and I used to the little gas car they had up there, which is now in Strasburg. Yeah. They broke me in on that thing, and I ran that to Wolfboro one day. And that's a fun thing to run. And but anyway, I enjoyed working on the railroad. Part of it was kind of hectic. I know I worked, when I was still working on freight, I worked BJ3, JB4. That was the Boston to White River Junction job. Yep. And it ran up that was when we had the 16-hour law. And you go up and you leave Boston. You didn't have to work too much. You'd have maybe, we'd have a couple of Alcos, B unit, maybe a couple of F units. You'd have anywhere from 3 to 4 engines on the train, and anywhere from 50 to 100 cars. We had to switch all the way up. But the switchers, we stop at Nashua, Manchester, and then we get a Concord, and then we had to go up to Slate Hill. That's where the prison was. Oh, yeah. And we'd go up there. They cut the engine. I'd have to cut the engines off. I was on the head end. I had to cut the engines off. Yep. And then we'd take the whole, sometimes we'd have 4 diesels, and we'd go all the way up to Slate Hill.
The Swenson Granite?
Yeah. I would jump off at the crossing right there by the prison, flag the crossing, and the engines would continue on up to Slate Hill, pick up a gondola or whatever they had, come back. I get back on the engines and go back. We never went in the prison. But I know sometimes they did go in the prison, but not when I was on the job.
Coal, I think they got in there.
Oh, yeah.
Coal cars, yeah.
Yeah, they go in there once in a while, but not when I was on the job. Yeah. But then we go back down to pick up our train, and then we head up to Lebanon. Yep. And it was in the fall, and I think we had 3 Alcos on that day. I didn't like those. Those were nice engines, but they're smelly. Oh, yeah. But anyway, we rode up, and the engineer we were dragging about 80 cars, and we started spinning and everything else. The engineer says, "We're not going to make the hill." So he says, "Why don't you?" We had a fireman in those days too. A fireman would. The engineer says, "You and the fireman get out in the front of the engine and get some sand." And sand, I uncoupled the train from the diesels from the freight cars, and we went up the hill and we sanded the rails. Yep. And then we went back down, coupled the train back up again, and went into a White River. Yeah. But it was all right, but finally they got down to the 12-hour law. That was a lot better. Mm-hmm. We had a nice bunkhouse up there in White River Junction we used to stay in. It's still there, but they want to tear it down, what's left of it.
The YMCA building.
Yeah, that was one of the best places I ever stayed in.
Yep.
And it was very clean. They gave you clean sheets. They had showers and everything there. And the dirtiest place I ever stayed in was the Dover engine house.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that place was filthy.
Yep.
It was a buggery.
Was the roundhouse down there?
The roundhouse is still there.
Yep.
But it was an awful place to sleep, I'll tell you. I only stayed there once, one night.
Mm-hmm.
And, but no, it was, I had a lot of, got interesting, I was on that Dover, excuse me, on that train that went to White River. I was on that for, that was a 7-hour job, 7-day week.
Yep.
And it was all nocturnal. And you go up there, I think I worked it 3 weeks and 3 weeks straight.
Sure.
And boy, I'll tell you, I didn't get much sleep.
No.
And
Sleep in the daytime.
no, I know. I stayed in the Hotel Manga one night before they tore that down.
Yep.
And we had a room there. But no, that was, then of course when I was in the Passenger, that was all right. And so I didn't go in the freight anymore. But I worked all over in the Passenger on the Bud cars. Mm-hmm. And then they got the Pullman cars, they got those. And I worked the job to Rockport and Ipswich. We only went as far as Ipswich then. And Newburyport, they went down to with freight. But we only went down there once.
Oh, the city track?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I never went down on
It
that.
was done in the late 60s, I think.
Yeah, that was doing. I never got to go down there.
Yeah.
But
now you worked the Portsmouth switcher too, right?
yes, Portsmouth was a real nice job.
Yep.
And we went up to just before you cross the river there. I forgot the name of the place. It's a big. There used to some tank cars. It's a place that used to have tank cars. We used to go up there. There was the Simplex Wire and Steel. Mm-hmm. We used to have gondolas out of there. We used to go up there. I think that's still there. And but anyway, no, the Portsmouth job was nice. They had quite a bit of a nice yard there.
Yeah.
And I don't know what there is there now, but
it's getting busy again.
Is it busy again now?
46 cars of propane last week.
No kidding! Wow.
Yeah. Now, did you ever get an Amesbury at all down the eastern route?
Once.
Yep.
One night one day we took the switcher and they said we got to get on Amesbury and pick up a freight car. Mm-hmm. And so we took the light engine. It was a switcher and one of the 1100s, and we drove. We went all the way down to Amesbury up in the line, and line was all overgrown with brush and trees and everything else. And we had to flag the crossings and all that. And we get up there. There was a cop come down. He stops at one of the crossings. And we're just about to go across. He says, "Oh my God," he says, "I don't think I ever saw a train down here before." He was amused. Yeah. And so anyway, we went in, we found the freight car and we took it back out. But shortly after that, the line was abandoned. Yeah. But that's the only time I ever went down on the Amesbury branch.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever get up to the air base there in Newington? Was the switcher still going up to Peace?
Yeah, we went up there once. Yeah, I went up there a couple times. Yeah. Went up there at night. Yeah. And we had to flag the crossing there on the main road that runs out of Portsmouth.
Yeah, turnpike. Yeah.
Yeah, the turnpike. Yeah. And we had to go up there. We had a switcher that night. We had to go up there to the air base. We had to take some cars out of there one night. Yeah. But it's kind of hairy when you get out on the road there. Of course, I had a lantern. A fusee. I had a lighted fusee.
Yeah, that's a pretty big crossing there too.
Oh yeah, I know.
Up in Gonick too. It crossed again.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Branch.
Yeah. But no, I did a lot of those jobs were nice jobs. I enjoyed them. Mm-hmm. And but it was it was fun. A lot of it wasn't too good. I'll tell you that standing on top of a boxcar in a driving rainstorm. In those days, we had to ride the tops of the cars. Yeah. And be very careful that you didn't fall off. And one car derailed one day when I was on top, and fortunately it didn't tip over. And Lawrence, it was pretty bad. They dumped a car in the canal up there one night, but I wasn't on the train that night.
Oh yeah, sure.
And but anyway, no, it was. I enjoyed a lot of it. I'm trying to think of anything else. We've had a lot of interesting episodes that used to happen. I know Lawrence, where was it? Lawrence, yeah, we used to go down the middle of the street. Mm-hmm. And we come back one morning, and you go by a bunch of some tenement houses just before you go back onto where the main line was in Lawrence. And little kids, this was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and a couple of little kids on the platform of one of the houses there on the porch, and they were jumping up and down, looking. I says, oh, it's kind of interesting. I looked back and said to the engineer, and I says, you don't know it, but we're ripping up the tracks. We got some cars that are derailed. We dragged the things right up, right back till they were just ripping up the rails. The cars are still on the track, but we're tearing up the rails behind the cars. Yeah. And we got back into Lawrence Yard. We had about 8 or 10 cars. And another night, we were going down the middle of the street, and we had, 5 or 6 cars. We're down the middle of the street towards the end. And it was down near I forgot the name of the place there. It was a, I don't know what they had in the Jello pudding or something, I guess.
Oh, yeah. It was on the M&L branch?
This was the right down there in Lawrence.
Yeah.
Well, I worked all those sidings in there. We're down the middle of the street there, and this car, this was 3 o'clock in the morning, some drunk comes down in his car. And he slammed into this. I saw he's going to hit the car, so I told the engineer, I said, big hole it. I said, he's not going to make it. Crash! He hit the side of the car. The side of the freight car.
Yeah.
So I got over to I saw the guy, and I got out and I walked over to him, and he wasn't injured. His car was pooched up quite a bit, but he could still drive it. Radiator was all leaking all over the road and everything. And so anyway, he said, where did you guys come from? I says, where did we come from? I says, where did you come from? And he was drunk anyway. So they got the police down there and everything, and he could still drive the car, what was left of it.
Yeah.
And but anyway, but we had some funny episodes up there. And I'm trying to think if there's anything else. We had one classic derailment across the south end of the yard, Lawrence Yard there. Bunch of cars come down. They bled the cars off, but they bled off, I think it was about 10 cars, and we collided right in the middle of the street and pushed them off the track and all over the street. Oh, what a mess that was. They had to block the streets off for quite a while. I saw that happening. Mm-hmm. And but anyway, no, it was kind of interesting. I enjoyed some of it. A lot of it I enjoyed. A lot of it I didn't.
Yeah. What was it like working commuter out of Boston?
It was all right. Yeah, you come down, you get you knew what I was doing. If I owned a job.
Yeah. For
a long time. But you get the people on the train at 5 o'clock at night. You get the people on the train, and you get down, pick up the tickets and everything, and you have to make the stations Lynn. We have to make Chelsea first, and then Lynn, and then Swampscott all the way down. I was working out of Rockport.
Yeah.
And we get down to Rockport, and then then I'd come back and then to Boston, and then I'd go back to Rockport and then back to Boston. Mm-hmm. No, actually, I started out of Rockport, so I went to Boston and back to Rockport. 2 round trips. And then one of the trips I had, we had to take one of the commuter train that came in on the station there. He'd had like 6 cars, and we had to take one of the cars off and go back to Boston with a single butt car. So I had to, on my job, I wasn't supposed to do it in the railroad, but I had to go back, make sure the brakes was on, the handbrake was on one of the rear cars. Then I would release the brake on the car I was going to run, and I pull the pin, go back to the bud car, and pull it ahead about a half a car length ahead. Then I go walk back, and then I would make sure the hoses were all up and everything, and then get it all ready to go back to Boston. Mm-hmm. And and then the engineer lived in Rockport, and his name was Sullivan. And I will say that because he was Paul Sullivan. He was the one that was killed in Prides.
Oh, yeah.
And but he lived there down the street there in one of the houses. So he come back to the car. I says, give him the controller. Here you go. I says, all set to go. So we just get in and go, and they make sure there's nobody running or anything. Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, he got involved in when they had that accident down in Prides. Yeah. And they ran into a freight that was running up. They ran up on the other track that was out of service. Right. It was a coach. I mean, one of those Pullman cars. So put it right on top of the diesel. Yeah. I wasn't on the train then, but I saw it. That was a mess. But the worst thing I didn't like were the rock concerts. Oh yeah. And we used to have rock concerts at least 2 or 3 a month.
At the Garden?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we'd have sometimes 6 or 7 cars full of screaming idiots. And I'll tell you, and by the time we got back, they were drunk.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, once in a while, they'd ride on the top of the cars.
Oh, jeez.
Well, they killed a couple.
Oh, yeah.
They killed one night. I wasn't on the train that night, thank God. He was standing up on top of the car when they hit the Salem Tunnel.
Ooh.
He didn't know it when he hit it.
Yeah.
Well, he was killed instantly.
Yep.
And they killed 2 in Montserrat one night. They fell down between the cars,
Yeah. Sure.
and they were just ground up.
That happened on the Northeast Quarter, I think, not too long
Oh yeah,
ago. Yeah, somebody was on.
but they were crazy like that, and but you see, I saw one kid there one night. One day they had the circus playing in Boston,
Yeah.
and when they stopped at Swampscott Station, I looked out and there was one of the people that were getting off there says, "Hey, you got somebody riding on the roof of the car," and I says, "Oh." So I got back in the car. We were still sitting in the station. I looked up. We had the Pullman cars in. I had the door open. The door open. I saw him up there, and I said, "Hey, you, come here." So I grabbed him. He started down the side of the car, and I grabbed his leg like that, and I'm starting to pull him. He's a teenager, and he started to cry. Oh, let go, and all that. Well, anyways, I let him on the car anyway, finally. I got him on the car. And I says, "Did you enjoy your ride?" And I says, "You thought it was a freebie, didn't you?" And I said, "Well, guess what? Where are you going?" He said, "I'm going to Beverly." I says, "That'll be $3. I says, "He didn't save any money."
Yeah.
Well, he didn't try that again. He was I think he was only about 14 or 15 years old.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Did you ever work any of the camp trains?
No,
Up in
I
Portland?
never worked any of those, no.
Those were still running around that time, I think.
Yeah, oh yeah.
60s, yeah.
Yeah, they were running, they had those 2 or 3 a year, I guess.
Yeah.
Sometimes they run 15, 20 cars on those.
Yeah, all over the place, too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But some of those trains are all right, and some of them weren't. I dreaded the concert trains, but I don't know if they still have them or not. But I guess they're
trains, yeah.
quieter crew now.
Yeah, right.
But now we had to be careful. Of course, we were working the B&M days. You could do a lot under the B&M than you could with Amtrak.
Right.
And
You were working during the blizzard
yes,
in the 70s? Have any
Yes.
stories about that?
yeah, we were on a. So we had 2 Bud cars that night. We're coming out of Boston, and we only went as far as Ipswich. That was the end of the line for us.
Yeah.
And we used to keep the cars right on the main line. And we didn't make it into the station that night. Just before the crossing, we buried ourselves in a drift about 6 feet deep. And we stalled. And we just left the Bud cars where they were.
Yeah.
And another night we were coming back. It wasn't snow on the ground. The kids piled a whole bunch of brush on the tracks. Just as they leave Hamilton, going towards Ipswich.
Yeah.
And I was up front with the engineer. We had 2 Bud cars then. Both were powered. And I was on the engineer. We came around just after you leave Hamilton Station. You start up that kind of a hill light and you curve around a little bit. Mm-hmm. We saw the piling brush, and the engineer says, "Geez, I don't know. The kids left some brush on the track. So we'll hit it. We'll push it out of the track." That was our undoing.
Oh, boy.
They had a big boulder under the brush.
Mm-hmm.
We went right up on the top of the boulder and wiped out the pan under the Bud car.
Yeah.
Oil all over the place.
Oh, geez.
Well, all right, now we're crippled. But the other Bud car we're pulling still got a motor we could run. So he went back to the other Bud car. We split the rock in 3 or 4 places.
Yeah.
Incidentally, the kids that did it were in the bushes watching us. And they were laughing.
What's this story about a train on the Gloucester branch with 60 arrests?
Oh, that.
Yeah.
I was on the train that night.
Yeah.
We were coming out. It was a rock concert. And we had, I think we had 4 or 5 Bud cars. And the kids I don't know whether they were Bud cars or whether they were, yeah, they had to have been Bud cars. After they left Manchester, I think one of the middle Bud cars, there was about, I'll say about 20 kids in there, 25 kids in there. And they were all drunk as a skunk. They were all going to Gloucester.
Yeah.
And they decided to do some damage. They smashed windows, they slit seats, they did everything. So we had to when we got down to Gloucester drawbridge, we had to get off at the drawbridge and check in, sign a register. Mm-hmm. Well, the conductor, I wasn't I was just a trainman that night. Conductor got off and he says, we're going to get into the Gloucester draw to get hold of the Gloucester police and the riot squad. And we're going to limp into Gloucester station very, very slow. Make sure the cops are all down there. So anyway, we just crawled into Gloucester station. The kids are still on the car, screaming, yelling, throwing beer around, peeing in the aisle and everything else. Well, anyway, we get into Gloucester station, and the riot squad were down there. And what car? That one right there. Cops here, cops there, with handcuffs. Every kid, as they came off the car, click. Oh. They arrested every one of them. I don't know what they ever happened to them. Well, of course, the car was a cripple now. They had to bring it back to the engine house because they did an awful job on it. Sure. I walked into it, and it was awful. And the beer was all over. Those days, they had bottles and cans. And beer was all over. You could wade through the beer. I mean, it was like every time the car moved, you could see it all over the floor. There must have been 100 beer cans in there all over the floor. Yeah. But, they used to put up with that stuff. And, but anyway.
Did you ever work the freight on the Newburyport branch at all? Out towards Wakefield and up that way?
Yeah, I worked down there several times. Yeah, that was a good job.
Yeah.
And he had a funny thing happen. The engineer, forgot what his name was. He's gone now. We went by a big golf course.
Oh yeah.
And so we're heading over towards Wakefield Junction, and we stopped. And he gets out of the engine, and he walked over the golf course, and he picking up golf balls. So he came by. He had 3 or 4 of them he picked up. He was a golfer.
Oh sure.
I'll tell you another funny thing that happened too. I used to work with I used to make a round trip to Rockport in the daytime, around noontime. We get down to Rockport, and then we went right back to Boston. We had a single Bud car, and after we left, after we left Beverly Farms, there's an area you go by the beach, and then you come into Manchester. Well, there was this big old farm that was right there alongside of the track. Old abandoned buildings, a building in there or something. Well, the conductor I worked with, he's an awfully nice guy. And we got along, he was awfully nice guy. I worked with him for quite a while. He's gone now. And the engineer was too. I forgot who that was, but I think he's gone too. But anyway, we got out. We got up to, after we left, we got in between Manchester. We got down where that barn was, and he stopped. I thought to myself, what the hell are they stopping for? So anyway, the engineer and the conductor both got off the Bud car, and they walked over to the barn. Mm-hmm. They're looking all inside the barn. And pretty soon they came back, and what's going on? He says, nothing, just looking at it, just exploring. Oh, all right. So anyway, we get into Rockport. This woman gets off. We had, I don't know, about 10 people on the train going to Rockport. The woman gets on. She says, excuse me, sir. She says, why did we stop there? She says, I saw the engineer and the conductor looking inside that barn there. Oh, what was going on? And I thought to think fast on that one. And I says, we had a little problem with it. We had to get something. I think we had to use some baling wire or something for something in the cab of the engine. We were looking around because we had to put something on. There was something fell off the engine. We had to look and see if we could find something so we could get the motor so we can get into Rockport. So she said, oh, okay. So she was pacified anyway. But she didn't figure out what it was. There was all kinds of stuff used to happen like that. And I'm trying to think of the other incidents. Some I won't repeat. But anyway, no, that was it was fun. You know, I like the passenger end of it.
Yeah.
Most of it was very good. And then I used to get called on this off the I was qualified for all over the passenger division. I was qualified for Newburyport, for Rockport, I think South Acton, but I didn't like working out South Acton. After several years, I kind of forgot where the stations were. Mm-hmm. And Lowell.
Yep.
And so anyway, I worked a Lowell job. I worked out of Ipswich. Then we went into Boston. And then we went to, then we made a round trip to Lowell. And then we came back to Boston. And then we went back to Ipswich. And that was a good job. I loved it. And but the train dispatcher was always calling me off the job where I was a qualified conductor. Some conductor would mark off, so they want me to run his job. So I'd have to do that. So I might be in Rockport one day, and I might be in. This happened about every week, mm-hmm. And I got kind of tired of it after a while. I like my job. I was on a trainman's job actually. Yeah. But I say I was qualified. But when it came time to retire, when I hit 65, I was out of there.
Oh, yeah. All done. That's it.
But
what's this? You have a story about a drive-in movie and a conductor pulling shades?
You want to say this?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. But anyway, we stopped. There used to be a drive-in theater just outside of, I think it was Wellington or somewhere.
Yeah.
It was alongside of the tracks. And the screen was facing the track. And we used to ride out of there. And the conductor was a very, very pious person, awfully nice guy. He's gone now. But anyway, we'd leave. That was when the bud cars used to have curtains.
Yeah.
So the drive-in theater was on the right-hand side. So I was on a Reading job then. And the engineer was, well, he's gone too. But I kind of forget what his name was, but that doesn't matter. But anyway, we started out. And I often wondered why the conductor always pulled the curtains down on one side. And so did the passengers. And this is at nighttime. So the passengers asked the conductor, how come you pulling the curtains down? Well, you know, I don't know, we made some excuse up anyway. So we got out where the drive-in theater was, and we stopped. And we stopped, and we waited sometimes 5 minutes. And people, I don't think the people knew what was going on. But it was, they showed movies that were, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you know, those kind of movies. So anyway, that happened. So anyway, when I got to be the boss on that train there, that stopped. We went right by the theater. Well, anyway, the theater's been long closed.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But anyway, it was no, there was a lot of stuff like that used to happen.
Yeah. Now, you also got into not only working for the railroad, but photographing trains and getting very involved with chasing trains. How did you get into photographing the railroad in the Boston and Maine?
I didn't bring my camera with me until, well, when I got on passenger, I used to bring my camera because I had a locker over in the crew facilities place there up down on Causeway Street. Yeah. And I used to keep my camera in there. And but I had, when I got into Boston at noontime, after the middle trip I had 5 hours off. Mm-hmm. So I'd wander all around Boston with my camera. Yep. And I used to walk. Those days I used to love to walk. Mm-hmm. I'd walk sometimes 4 or 5 miles. I walked out to Harvard Square one day, and I walked down South Boston. I'd go everywhere. But you never know what you're going to see. I'd walk over to Charlestown Navy Yard. Sometimes there was ships there. Mm-hmm. And I like the ships, too. And I'd get down and see the ocean liners, if they happen to be any ocean liners in. And one day I went out to Castle Island and walking around. I'd take a boat out there, a ferry boat out there. But it was, you know, I took a lot of pictures around. And but I never had any trouble anywhere.
Now you were taking pictures in the early 50s, right? When the steam was still steam
Yes.
was starting to go away.
I took pictures in 48.
48.
But 1950 was when I got my color camera. And, of course, living in Marblehead, they still had a lot of steam trains down there.
Yeah.
And they had, let's see, the day they had the Swampscott wreck, I went to see that. That was gory.
50.
And that was 56.
56.
And I went up to see that. I was working in the machine shop at the time. I told the boss I'm going to be a little late coming back to work today in my lunch hour. He said, "Why? You going out to see the wreck?" And I says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, don't spend all day there." And I says, "I won't." So anyway, I went out. Well, they had the big hook down there, and they had that was a mess anyway. But anyway, I knew that night they were going to have steam engines on the Marblehead train.
Yeah.
So I was waiting for it. So I heard it. I went ready for it, with my camera. So I was taking pictures. I took probably 100 pictures of the steam trains down there. And I used to live next door to an engineer that was on the Marblehead branch. And he was the engineer on the steam engines. So he said, "Anytime you want to ride, come on down." Okay. So I used to ride with him in the steam locomotive over to Salem when they put the trains to bed. And so I rode 3 or 4 times with him over there in the steam locomotives, the 3600s. And but I used to have a lot of rides. And in those days, you could walk around the railroads. I walked out. Where was it? I was in Boston Yard one day, and I was walking around, and they were still switching the yards with the big 080s. They had the 600s, and they came by, and I was taking pictures there. This is 1952, I think. The engineer says, "Hey," he says, "come on, you want to ride?" Okay. So I'm riding a while with him in the cab of the engine. And another day I went down the Lynn switcher and got that. They had a main central engine on that, a switcher, a Portland Terminal switcher. And they'd leased, I think. Oh, yeah. And so I had a cab ride in that for a while. And then another day I was over I used to hang around the New Haven New Haven, over the big yards in New Haven. They had these big diesels there, what the heck they were. They had the high hoods there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I got friendly with one of the guys over there. And this was 1947, I think, or 47 to 48. I used to walk over there. I was still in high school then. And so I got friendly with him. He says, "Hey, you want to take a ride?" I said, "Sure." So one of the switcher came by. He says, "Get in." So I drove them for about an hour and a half in the cab of that thing, all over Boston Yard. Oh, yeah. But they used to let you ride around. Nobody cared. And that isn't the only place that's happened. I mean, the Canadian Pacific was good too. Yep. And so was the Central Vermont and the Bangor Rustic.
Yeah. Spent a lot of time up in Montreal and up in Canada.
Oh yeah, I used to go up to Montreal once or twice a year. Yeah. And I walked all over that place up there. I love Montreal. I was out there one day, and it was wintertime. I went up New Year's, cold, freezing cold. Oh yeah. And I was out along the track there, and the commuter train came out. It had one of those branch line engines on it. The 47, I think the number of it was, or 46, or one of those. Yeah. And they stopped. They asked me, "Come on, get on. You look like you're freezing." They took me into Montreal, the cab of the thing. Yeah. But
walk around Turcotte Yard and stuff.
But yeah, I used to go around Turcotte Yard. I used to go all around. Nobody bother you. Yeah. Westmount, they had the big engine facility there. Westmount, I rode up in the rear end of one of those observation cars one day when they're coming out of Union Station there in Montreal up to the Westmount Yard there. They gave me a ride in that. Yeah, but they of course they don't do it now. But I mean, those days, God, I don't know how many cab rides I had in those places up there.
Oh yeah, and the enthusiast fan trips too. The
RRE enthusiast trips were. Yeah.
When did you join the RRE?
Oh, I don't know. It was back in my teen years, I guess. Yeah. But I didn't do too much engine riding. I tell you, one trip I went on was interesting. They had the B&M bought 4 engines from the Lackawanna Railroad. Yeah. 9600s, 96, 86, 87, 88, and 89, I think the numbers of them were. Well, anyways, they had the 86, 89, or 36, 89, I guess it was. Yeah. on a fan trip out to Concord. Then when they got to Concord, they cut that engine off. They put 2 moguls on. And we went up, went up, I forgot where the heck we went up to Claremont or somewhere.
Claremont, yep.
And we went up with the 2 moguls. And no, I didn't get any cab rides there. But I forgot, it was one of those lines I got a cab ride in. When those round the mountain trips,
Oh, yeah.
I had a ride, and they used to put double switchers on. The small switch engines, they had them together. I rode in the cab of one of those once. But, you know, I wasn't too much on cab rides then in those days, but, you know, I was kind of bashful about asking for cab rides, but but I know the Bangor and the Rustic are good about letting you cab rides, and so is the Central Vermont, as long as you got permission from the railroad.
Yeah.
And I always write the railroad, and they'd say, what train do you want to ride? Okay, I want to ride the Searsport job.
Yeah.
So I used to go down to Searsport. I knew the engineer on that too. Wayne Duplessis' name was. I don't know if he's still alive or not. But anyway, he worked for the railroad. He's the engineer on that. But the Bangor and the Rustic were the friendliest railroad.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to ride down to Searsport with them in the cab. They had those BL2s
Yep.
and F units on the train. They'd have one of each. You ride down on one engine, you ride back on the other. And they'd have about 50 cars, 60 cars they'd haul out of Searsport. Mostly tank cars. So one day where I was riding back with them, and we got halfway back, and the conductor says, hey, he says, we're going to stop. You want a picture? Why don't you take our picture? Okay. So he stopped the freight train, and I got out and I took the picture.
Yeah.
But they were good about doing stuff
yeah.
like that.
I think I read that Northern Maine Junction, they even sold souvenirs.
Oh, yeah.
The BAR did. You could
Oh, yeah,
buy
they
hats
did.
And patches. And,
Yeah.
Yeah. It was,
No, they were a real good railroad. I rode them a couple of times. I rode up to visit Oakfield one night on the cab.
oh, big yard.
I think we had 5 engines, and I think we had 150 cars.
Yep.
And they pulled a drawbar coming back, I remember, in one of the cars, tank car. And I'll tell you, that was a night I didn't get much sleep. I didn't get any sleep at all. And I was driving back down to, I was staying at the Trolley Museum then. I was a member of the Trolley Museum, and I just about made it back to Kennebunk that night without going off the road. But I know I had a few incidents, you know, when I was on the railroad, especially on freight, when I had to drive, and and you'd be driving it at night, you know, and I almost wiped the toll booth out one night there in Hampton there when coming back one night. I used to stop every couple of miles and get out of the car and walk around the car and then get back in, and then I'd drive another couple of miles and get out again.
Yeah.
It's the only way I ever got home.
Right.
But, you know, you didn't get much sleep in those days.
No.
I had a couple of incidents at home where I got sick, got passed out, you know, get up there and you fall down and you hit my head one night. Oh, God, it was awful. I didn't go to the hospital, but I almost went there. But, you know, you didn't have much sleep, but I like the railroad. I like working for it, but I don't miss it.
Right. Now, when you were on BJ3 on the Northern job, you stopped in Manchester Yard, and the switcher would come out and do its work. And
Oh, yeah.
was it a nighttime job?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's switches in all those places. Manchester, was a big one. They had switches there. Nashua, they had one.
Yeah.
Lowell, they had one. And Concord, of course, they had one. I didn't do any work. I just sat in the engine.
Right.
But after he left Concord, then I had to work.
Yeah. What did they do up in they dropped their car in White River Junction, their train in White River Junction, or?
Yeah, we'd come into the yard,
Yeah.
and we'd pull right down to the yard. They cut the caboose off.
Yeah.
And then they'd pull down. We pulled down to the yard, and then I'd head pin, and then we'd go back with the engines back to the terminal back there, and just across the river there,
Westboro, yeah.
Westboro,
Yeah.
and we just put up, and we'd have to put up until, well, let's see, we get up there in the morning, and then, of course, now you got to get some sleep. So I go over that bunkhouse they had there, which is very nice. I sleep for about 5-6 hours. Then I go up. I walk up there. Those days they had the bus station up at the top of the hill,
Yeah.
and they had a nice restaurant in there. I'd walk up there and get something to eat. Then I had to walk back down. Now it's getting dark, and of course I'm all ready to go back to Boston again. We left there about 9 at night.
Oh yeah.
Go back to Boston, and we get back into Boston about I don't know, it was a wee hour. No, we got back to 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning.
Sure.
But once you get back to Boston, then you were out. They just get in the yard, and that was it. And then go to a hotel. I went to the Madison there one night, and other times I'd go home. If I had my car. I had my car over the engine house, so I would drive home. But if it didn't feel like staying there overnight, I mean, driving home, I'd go to the Madison. We had a room there on the second floor.
Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to touch on a little bit is what I've seen in your films and your slides is in 1961, when the Monadnock Steamtown and Northern was running out of Bradford. How did you find out about that? Because that was kind of a last ditch operation up there on the CNC.
Oh, I don't know. I had bulletins and stuff like that. I found out about it. Yeah.
RE probably has some information about it.
So
you went up there and chased that.
1961. No, I didn't have a car then.
Yeah.
It was like, wait a minute. Yeah, I had a car then. What am I saying? It was in the 50s.
Yeah.
64. Yeah, I had a car. I drive up there.
And then 62 in Keene too.
Yeah.
Did you get to ride in any of those engines at all, or just chase them?
The only one I ever rode in that I know of up there, I rode in one of I rode one of those Canadian Pacific steam engines, Pacifics there.
Oh yeah.
I rode one of those out. I knew the engineer there. I rode out with him a round trip.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't think I ever rode anything in Conway.
Oh yeah, that's right.
I rode the mud car they had up there running once.
Yep.
Well, that wasn't that long ago either.
Right.
And no, I never rode any engines up there, but except for when I worked up there on the freight.
On the local, yeah.
Yeah.
Were you ever on any of the snow trains up that way, as a fan or as an employee?
I was on a snow train when I was a little kid, about 6 years old, and my mother and father took me on a snow train, and they had a 3600 on it. I remember, Pacific. And I was only about, what did I say? I was 36, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, about 1930. Oh, I don't know. I was only about 6 years old anyway.
Yeah.
And he rode up to Crawford Notch. What's the next town from Crawford Notch?
Fabian's?
Fabian. We went up to Fabian. And they had a Y up there.
Yes.
And we got to Bartlett. They put a steam engine on. They put another steam engine as a helper. Mm-hmm. And they had a May Central steam engine on and a B&M Pacific. And I wasn't taking pictures then, but my mother took a picture of one. And so anyway, we went up, and then, of course, they unloaded everybody that wanted to go skiing. And, of course, I didn't ski. I was too young. And my father didn't ski either. So we went back, and then, of course, the train came back, and then we'd go back down to back home after that. That was the only snow train I ever went on. But I went on the round the mountain trips. I used to go on those quite often.
Yep.
And they were fun to go on. $5, about $5 round trip. Mm-hmm. I don't even think it was that much. I think it was like $4.
Yeah.
And I was like 500 miles.
Yeah, out of Portland, and then would have gone up.
Go all around. You went to, you went out of Boston. You went all the way up to you went up to Concord. Then you go over to Woodsville, up around that way. You go through Woodsville and then down through the Crawford Notch.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think it was 500 miles.
Right.
I still got some brochures on that. Almost, I gave them away. Mm-hmm. But that was a good trip. They had like 12 or 13 cars on there, including a dining car.
Yep.
And which is still around. I think it's in the Steamtown.
Yeah, the Mountaineer. Yep.
Mountaineer, yeah. I've eaten in that several times.
Right, because they had it at Keene and the Monadnock Northern.
Yeah, I've eaten in that.
Sure. So you retired from the B&M or from the MBTA?
Well, we worked for the MBTA.
Yeah.
But I retired from the B&M in 1998.
Okay, 98.
And
and you hired on the B&M in
56.
56. All right, when McGinnis.
No, not 56. 68. That's when I hired out.
Okay.
So I worked 30 years, and then I retired.
Yeah.
As soon as my time was up, that was it. And I got my pension. I'm all set on that. But some of the guys I worked with on the railroad, we had one conductor there that worked on the railroad for over 70 years.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the older guys, we were in Major Greeno's interview. He's talking about people in the 80s and 90s.
I worked with Major Greeno.
Yep.
I worked with him when I first started working on passenger.
Yep. On the eastern route.
Yeah. He was a stickler for fares. I know that. I remember that.
Yeah.
If you didn't have your money, that was it.
Yeah, he talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
Collecting the fares, and he said the worst branch to work for that was, or maybe it was
the line over to after you leave Lynn, you go over through Saugus branch.
Saugus, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Saugus branch.
Well, I'll tell you something about the Saugus branch. I'm glad you mentioned that. They had a big fire in Chelsea.
Yes.
And a huge fire. So anyway, I went in there, and Lester Stevenson was the train master down at the North Station in those days. He's gone now. Awfully nice guy, and he's also a rail fan. So anyway, they called me to go into Boston that night, and we gotta bring a bunch of Bud cars over to back to Rockport and Ipswich. Yeah. And so the only way we can get over there is over the Saugus branch. Of course, the fire had already burnt down most of the buildings. The tracks were out of commission because there were hoses all over the track and buildings had collapsed over them and everything else. So we went into Boston. We got a whole bunch of Bud cars. I forgot how many there were. I think it was 10 or 15 of them anyway. And so I had to go up. I was up with the engineer when he went over the branch, and I had to flag all the crossings. Yeah. And
the National Guard out for that too.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And all that.
I remember I saw the smoke from that fire. We were down. I was out with my wife that night. We were down at Rockport that night. We were down at a clam place, and I saw the smoke. I thought it was a thunderstorm coming.
Oh yeah.
It was black smoke, and I said to my wife, I said, "Jeepers, looks like a thunderstorm coming or something," and didn't know it, but it was a Saugus branch. Mm-hmm. Oh, we ran into a couple of big fires, I know, when I was working on the railroad. It was that big one in Lynn, too. We saw that. Buildings were burning like the devil. We had an engineer on there, liked fires. He liked to watch fires. And we come in one night, and there was this big factory burning like the devil next to the railroad track. Mm-hmm. We stopped. I'm letting the people off. I'm the conductor that night. And the engineer gets out, and he's standing on the platform watching the building burn down. And I looked at him. I says, hey, we got a train to run. I said, we got some people here who want to go home. He says, I want to see the fire. And I says, hey. I says, you're an engineer. I says, get on and run the Bud car. Oh.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's just about all I had for the first section here. So probably wrap it up. But thanks for sharing your stories with us.
Oh, quite all right. Sure. I'll find some more things to talk about.
Well, that's all we have time for today. We hope you enjoyed today's show. And as always, if you're interested in learning more about the Boston and Maine Railroad Historical Society or joining us, you can visit our website, www.bmrrhs.org.